Santa Claus came under the cover of holiday darkness and brought government-sponsored entities the greatest monetary gift of them all: unlimited financial support for the next 3 years. It was a gift that was stealthily given as children would nestle snug in their beds, and traders were at the malls making last-minute gift purchases, and mothers were putting the final touches on those sugar plum dishes. That's right, the Treasury has given these government-sponsored entities an unlimited financial lifeline and actually removed requirements to shrink their mortgage holdings by 10% a year. So what does it all mean? It suggests that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac will need a lot more than the $400 billion that was already allotted to their recovery. Of course, though, that barely scratches the surface of all the money that's really been poured into these entities. Look at the money that has already flowed into their coffers. From Treasury, you have they've bought senior mortgage-backed securities, $111 billion worth. Enterprise mortgage-backed securities, $202 billion. Mortgage-backed securities, what's a good way of explaining it? Sort of, it's an investment that's backed up by the assets held by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which for the most part are mortgages. And they try to use the cash flow to pay it off. You know, listen. It's toxic stuff, too. Let's face it. That's all that Fannie and Freddie really have, some better than others. By the way, Federal Reserve also in the act, too. They've bought $911 billion worth of enterprise mortgage-backed securities, and also they've bought debt, regular debt from these GSEs, $150 billion worth. Remember, like the health care bill, Fannie Mae was once heralded as the ultimate savior, an engine that would actually provide mortgages to low-income families. It was the centerpiece of the New Deal. In the last 9 quarters, Fannie Mae has lost $120.5 billion. Freddie, which was actually created to be a competitor, lost $67.9 billion. That's just these two entities in the last 9 quarters. It's shocking stuff, and it really makes me wonder how much health care is really going to cost at the end of, let's say, 10 years, 20 years. I thought my son made out pretty good with his souped-up laptop and guitar, but this is a heck of a gift, unless you're the one paying for it. Back with our roundtable, John Tammany, Stephen Sproul, and Peter Schiff. John, I want to start with you. This is just like, first of all, it was done it was like the darkness after the markets closed, everyone's shopping, everyone's getting ready for Christmas, and they pushed this through. Unlimited money from, this is nuts. Help us figure this out or understand it.
Well, perfect timing when the press are on vacation, but really, are any of us surprised by this?
I am surprised by this one, John. I'm a little surprised by this one.
It was always, by virtue of their ability to issue gargantuan amounts of debt, it was always clear that the government backed these entities implicitly. Now it's explicit. And this just ensures future crises in the future, because now we know that Fannie and Freddie can continue in their undisciplined ways, and the taxpayers will back them up. But probably what offends me the most about this is we continue this bipartisan, politically correct notion that Americans are made better off if a government with no resources of its own underwrites 9/10 of all mortgages. This is an impoverishing idea that ties people to houses at a time when they need to be mobile, at a time when capital is very mobile itself. This is anti-growth, and it's just offensive that we're continuing this direction.
Peter, what do you think?
Well, you know, for years, while Fannie and Freddie were helping to inflate the housing bubble, I was publicly, predicting their bankruptcy. I did it on Fox.
You did. Listen, there were a lot of times we debated. You were right. I was wrong. Go ahead.
Thanks, Charles. But, one of the things I didn't know for sure when I was making these predictions is whether the government would do the right thing and let them fail, or the wrong thing and bail them out. Well, now we know they did the wrong thing. They should have let them go bankrupt. We don't need Freddie. We don't need Fannie. They have poisoned the housing market. We need a free...
John just said that they're facilitating 9/10 of the mortgages. If they're gone, who facilitates that?
What happens is real estate prices have to adjust to the point where the private sector will finance them. The reason that there's no private money for mortgages is because real estate prices are too high. Nobody would lend their money for somebody to overpay.
Even right now, they're too high.
Yes, they're too high. They have to be able to come down. Meanwhile, with the stroke of a pen, the federal government has transformed trillions of dollars of Fannie and Freddie paper into Treasury debt. It's now indistinguishable. So the national debt has gone through the roof, and now we have even more crowding out, because now all this debt is government guaranteed. If a business businessman wants to borrow money, he can't get a government guarantee. Why is the federal government now, I think better than 95% of all the mortgages being financed right now are either being financed by Freddie and Fannie or the FHA.
Right.
The private sector is totally out.
Stephen, I don't get it. And this administration talks so much about too big to fail. I mean, when you say that it's unlimited, that they have a blank check, it can't get any bigger than that.
That's right. It's very troubling. And here's a detail that I found interesting when this story came out. At the same time, there was a story about the executives of these two companies, the CEOs of Fannie and Freddie. The details of their pay packages was released, and neither of these executives took any stock as part of their compensation. It's about $6 million apiece, and most of it's in cash, and no stock in the companies, which is very unusual for the CEO of a publicly traded company. So do you think that these guys know something that we don't?
Stephen, not only is it very unusual, but the Payzar has gone around to all of these other entities that need taxpayer money and said, listen, you've got to take a haircut. You've got to take a certain amount of money. This is beyond the pale that, by the way, $6 million that these CEOs are getting.
Yeah, that's right. And none of it in stock. So, I know that Fannie and Freddie's stock has gone up on the news that the government's giving them an unlimited credit card. But I would look at what their executives are doing, and their executives don't have any stock. Now, what I think that this means is that they know, and we should know, that this signals that the Fannie and Freddie are going to get much more aggressive about loan modifications and loan write-offs. There was a report out from Credit Suisse today that what this signals is that Fannie and Freddie are going to start buying troubled mortgages out of their MBS portfolios and aggressively writing them down. Congress, Barney Frank, is adamant that these agencies do more to mitigate foreclosures. Even if that's bad for the economy as a whole, even if real estate prices do need to fall further, even if it means more losses for the taxpayers, the most important thing is modifying these loans, preventing foreclosures, even if people borrowed way more than they can afford. So that's going to mean big losses for Fannie and Freddie. That's why I think their stocks will probably trade close to zero by the end of next year.
You know, John, what's interesting about this is that we've seen a pretty aggressive mortgage modifications already by a lot of these entities, and the failure rate is astronomical. Who's going to pay for all of this?
Of course, we're going to pay for it because, as Peter's pointed out, the government has no resources. Now, we've, of course, touched on how the weak dollar is anti-savings. Well, here's another example of how the average saver in the United States is going to be fleeced yet again. These mortgage modifications will be borne by the average person who has money in a pension fund who's invested in these safe investments because the government backs them. So here's another example where the government basically says, if you're a saver, we will attack you.
Yeah, but I mean, Peter, it's like the taxpayer who did everything right, once again, is bailing out the person that did the most irresponsible thing in the world. And at the same time, we're hearing how, Wall Street was so irresponsible and everybody else is so irresponsible.
Yeah, we have our incentives backwards. It's a reverse Darwinism. It's a survival of the unfittest. The government rewards bad behavior and punishes good behavior. So how are we going to have a society where we reward people who take on too much debt, but we punish people who are frugal and save? A lot of the people who are getting their mortgages modified, a lot of these people bought houses with zero down. A lot of people refinanced their mortgage so many times that they owe 2 or 3 times what they initially paid. They're not getting help. They're getting this huge handout, and it's being financed by taxing either directly or through inflation the people who played by the rules, who didn't buy houses they couldn't afford, who put their money in the bank, who aren't loaded up with debt. And ultimately, this is going to destroy the currency. And if we think we have a bad economy now, just wait till we're dealing with a runaway inflation.
But, John, what I don't understand, you brought up the point that both parties have sort of been, guilty in this respect. Why? What's so important about this? I mean, is it that whoever controls Fannie and Freddie, that there's just like a giant pot of money there? Why haven't either party really stepped to the plate and done the right thing with these guys?
The Republicans for years bought into this absurd notion of an ownership society, and the Democrats have always liked to redistribute wealth. Both were incorrect. The Republicans have always paid fealty to Adam Smith. Adam Smith always made clear that investment in housing was unproductive. Both parties don't understand basic economics, so they want to prop up the housing market. It's anti-growth, but neither party understands how economies grow.
Alrighty, guys. Well, 8 years after the attacks on 9/11 and terrorists are still able to get explosives on planes, are we any safer? Next.